Dr. Calabrese and Dr. Wabant are going to discuss progressive MS.
Okay, I guess I'll start on that one. So this is obviously the tough nut to crack. The therapies that we have are mostly designed for relapsing forms of the disease, and unfortunately we have much less in the way of treating progressive MS. But I think an important message that I'd like to convey is that's not because of lack of trying or lack of progress. And one has to recall that the therapies that we developed in the 90s and the early part of this millennium for relapsing MS were a direct result of research that occurred in the 80s and early 90s. And so we've made a lot of progress. We understand much more about how progressive MS happens, and therapies are in development, and some are actually being tested. Many of the therapies for relapsing MS, once they're approved in that form of the disease, get tested in progressive MS, and some of them haven't worked. And part of that may relate to the fact that MS has two different stages. There's inflammation that drives the relapsing form, and then there may be a separate process that occurs when patients become more progressive. And so it doesn't make sense to necessarily put out the inflammation or put someone on an immune modulating or immune suppressive drug when that's not the problem. And so increasingly we're understanding that there are other things that happen to the nerves in the progressive stage of the disease, and much of the research that we're doing now and the focus of the symposium of the investigators yesterday was on trying to understand this process and develop strategies to help with progressive MS. And I'll just give you two little snippets. One relates to genetics. So you know that there's been a lot of really wonderful genetics research, mostly done with the Harvard group and the San Francisco group, looking at genes that confer risk of getting MS. And there are now over 100 genes that are associated with risk of getting MS, and they're almost all related to the immune system. And so this is clearly a disease that has an immune signature to it, and that's very, very important. But what hasn't been done as much is looking at why some people rapidly become disabled, and then the other people live 40 years and don't appear to be physically disabled or have relatively benign courses of MS. And I think if we can understand what are the why some people actually do remarkably well, we may be able to capture those natural mechanisms, and maybe it has to do with natural recovery and repair. And in fact, as we've looked at people with relatively benign MS, there's some evidence that suggests that they remyelinate, that there are natural mechanisms for remyelination. And so this has led to a lot of excitement that Mother Nature has put cells into our brain that have the potential to actually turn into myelinating cells and repair the damage. And if we could just harness this power, we might be able to actually sidestep the whole political, biological obstacles of transplanting stem cells and harness these natural cells in the brain that can turn into myelinating cells. And we spent the last 24 hours talking about how we can image remyelination. You'll hear from some of the imagers progress towards quantifying myelin in the brain. And then we heard from some of the basic scientists within the group, and we always invite some people from the best and brightest from outside centers to kind of give talks and about how they're tracking how myelin happens normally during development. And if we can understand that better, then maybe we can harness some of the natural mechanisms by which we normally myelinate and turn those on or turn off the signals that stop that process. And the good news is that this has led to a target called LINGO, L-I-N-G-O, and if you block LINGO, which is one of the natural brakes that turns off myelination when we're fully myelinated as a child, you can turn on the cells again. You wake them up, they think you're young, and they start myelinating. And this works in a tissue culture dish, it works in animal models, and now it's in clinical trials. It's gotten through phase 1, which is the safety and toxicity, and it's moved on to phase 2, which is proof of concept. And so this is the very first attempt to really try something totally different than modulating the immune system. I think it's very exciting. It may or may not work, but even if it doesn't work, we will learn from the studies. There's a whole pipeline of drugs that are designed to enhance this process, and I think it's very exciting, and we have to develop the tools to monitor the myelin, as I was mentioning to you, and we think we have those tools, and I think this is gonna usher in a new era of a totally different approach to MS, and I think what we'll see in the end is that we can have a therapy to stop the inflammation and then a separate therapy to enhance the remyelination process. So I will stop there and let Emmanuelle speak a little bit about what she's doing.
Thank you, Peter. So there's always a feeling that progressive MS is not studied enough, and I think that this is totally recognized by the community now. There's a large international effort trying to actually help people to collaborate to develop meaningful basic science research, but also clinical research. So trying to really design studies to learn about new drugs and their potential to help patients with progressive disease. And there was a meeting in Europe actually a few months ago about that, and that is really starting a lot of collaboration worldwide in the US. So a lot of understanding now that people have really to collaborate more to fast track the progress on that topic. There are also several pretty large studies looking at the effectiveness of drugs that are on the market for preventing relapses and whether they will also slow down progression. So there's right now 3 gigantic trials ongoing. I guess the first one should be done within a year or so. So that's good news because it means potentially developing new drugs that could be right away on the market for progressive MS if they work in the studies. And based on prior experience we've had with some trials, we're understanding a little better now how to craft the studies in progressive MS, because we tended to have studies in progressive MS that were looking like studies in patients who had relapses. But now there's really an understanding of things that are specific to progressive MS, how to actually measure better progression in a more sensitive manner, so we don't have to wait 5 or 10 years to have the result from a trial, but we can do just a 2 or 3 year trial and it will be meaningful. We will not miss a possible benefit from a drug. And as an aside, there's also, as Dr. Calabrese mentioned, there's strategies to repair, but there's also neuroprotection strategies that people are trying to develop. And neuroprotection means trying to protect your nerve cells from injury, whatever the reason of injury is. And this is a strategy that several people have attempted in progressive MS. Actually, one study was in the UK. Another study was in Germany, and we just finished a study of neuroprotection at UCSF, OHSU, and Dr. Peltier at my left at Yale is actually analyzing all the MRI data. So within a month, we'll have the data from that neuroprotection study. So more and more now strategies to not only repair, but also slow down the damage, whatever the reason is. Lots of hope.
Thank you, Dr. Waban. Dr. Calabrese. Okay.